Again, this is Stephen Thomas Story, and we're with Seven Pillars Foundation, also known as Zion Life Foundation. And we are about love, trust, cooperation, and producing abundance to eliminate poverty, or reduce that among those who participate in that type of relationship. We've been talking about the 7 pillars and the 7 chains, and now we're going to talk about problem solving in any type of relationship. Doesn't matter what it is. Individuals have problems they face by themselves, intrapersonally, right here. This works the same way as it does in a marriage or a family or a community. This is the 7 pillars problem solving process. It's 7 steps, and these 7 steps work every time, as long as, conditioned upon, each person involved with the process is willing to walk through the process. The process is like this. Step number 1. You first identify the problem. I'm going to ask you to do this. Pick a problem. We'll just do this mentally together while we're going through it. Pick a problem. Some issue, something that you don't like, and you can bring it up in a moment or not. It's up to you. I might ask for a volunteer. But pick a problem, something that causes pain, something that's an issue. It's always attached to a relationship. So you pick the relationship that's part of that problem. Or at least what you believe is, okay? That's where we start. Have you got it in your mind? All right, number 2. Let's identify and acknowledge individual chains you feel that are related to that problem. Okay?
Personal or the other?
The chains are, it can be both, but you decide where you find those chains. If it's in yourself, in a different person, between somebody else, it can be in politics, whatever you want to choose is the problem. The chains are right here. I'm going to go back and forth between these slides. So just examine the chains, see which chains you identify as part of that problem. Raise your hand if you have identified pride in the problem you're thinking about. Okay? About 3 out of the 4. Okay, now, falsehood and deception. Do you know of something in that that is false or deceiving or misperception? Okay, some of you yes, some of you no. All right. Fear and doubt. Okay, the majority have identified that chain. All right. How about idleness and rebellion? Okay, about half of you. Okay. Resentment and bitterness. Is it associated? Okay, about half of you again. No, 3/4. Okay. Hopelessness, despair. Some of you are about half are experiencing that along that line. Now remember, each of these are categories. Depression fits within hopelessness and despair. All right? All the other categories have their characteristics and attributes also that fit within them, or anti-characteristics and attributes. All right? Number 7, hate, enmity, selfishness. Is that involved with any of the problems you're talking about? Some of the hands going up. All right. Now that we've identified chains that we believe are there, that we perceive are there right now, let's talk about the chains a little bit more. The character of these chains is that they're all interrelated. All of them are a part of number 7. So hatred, enmity, and selfishness comes in all kinds of degrees, shades of gray. Okay? You can have jet black, or you can have all different shades of gray, from almost white, to all different shades of gray, right, to black. There's all types of hatred. Pride is actually a characteristic of hatred and selfishness and enmity, right? Pride is actually, whether we understand it or not, pride is actually a hatred toward ourselves, and we don't even know it. Because pride is not serving us well. Pride is an enemy. Now think of pride as the thing, the tool, instead of the person. Okay? Separate the chains from the person. Too often we get into a problem solving and we see the person as the chains. And as long as we look at them as the chains, we will never be able to solve the problem. Does it make sense?
The only way you can solve the problem is to get rid of the person.
Get rid of the person to solve the problem?
If that's what you see.
If they are the chains, yes. Exactly. So you can't solve the problem and save the relationship.
Marriage is going to end in a divorce.
Okay.
You have to sever the
Very insightful. Thank you for that comment. To get rid of the chains, you have to get rid of the person as long as you see the person as the chains. So you cannot look at it that way. Separate the two. Separate the person from the issue. Even though the person is experiencing the issue. The reason they're experiencing it because they are in the chains. But I guarantee you, remove the chains from the person and you'll find out who the real person is. You'll find the real person is pillars. The real person is designed of the pillars. It's created by the pillars. It's made of the pillars. They are pillars. God doesn't create people to be chains. He creates them to be pillars. The only reason we have chains in our lives is because we accept them. In some way they're introduced to us. They are mixed with our pillars. Okay? Even persons with the worst types of addictions, so often a spouse will see their other spouse as an addiction rather than a husband or a wife. They'll see them as a person who is despicable, a person who is weak, a person who is irresponsible, a person who has no self-control. They assign the addiction to the person as though that is the person. And then they give them an ultimatum and say, get rid of this, stop this, or I'm divorcing you. And if the person doesn't understand how to get rid of it, they get rid of the person. Exactly what you were saying. They get rid of the person. Any wonder why we have such a high divorce rate?
Nobody's breaking chains.
They don't even understand how to break those chains. They're deep in the chains. There you go. You're on the next step. They don't even really know the chains are there. They think they're in the truth.
Can you have an exception to that?
Yes, there can be.
I mean, if someone's under the influence of alcohol or under the influence of drug abuse, that isn't the person unless they're willing and wanting and desiring to remove that themselves. You can't change that person.
That's right. You can't force anyone. You're right. You can't force anyone. So that's why humility. You look at the pillars here. Pillars are the keys, right? You are so correct. And I'm glad you're bringing these things up. It helps us a lot today. The pillars are the keys to unlocking it, but you can't force someone into humility. You can't force them to be meek and humble and submissive to truth.
That'd be prideful behavior.
If you're trying to force them, you're actually in the chains yourself, right? If you're trying to intimidate them into it, to belittle them into it, if you're trying to ridicule them into a submission, you're actually coming from the chains yourself. And all you're going to do is create a chain reaction. So what in the world do you do with it, right?
What's the concept of chain reaction?
It is a chain reaction, and it turns into a nuclear fest by the end. It just keeps getting worse and worse and worse and worse until it completely just destroys everything. So we want to get out of these chains. You cannot deal with the problem while you're in the chains. Both people, all people, however many people are in that relationship, have to choose to get out of the chains and go to the pillars, because they're the pillars are the keys, are the answers. All the answers are in the pillars to solve it. All of them. Let's go back a slide. Identify and acknowledge individual chains we've done. Step number 3, identify hidden false perceptions. Now, have you identified, as you're thinking about this relationship that you've got in your mind, the problem, the issue that you've thought of, can you identify any kind of a false belief right off the top of your head when you're thinking about it?
Well, yes, number one is it's the person, or it's Islam, it's Muslims. It's
okay, so you're thinking about countries, nationalities, religions who have strife going on in the world, and right now Islam and people that think all Muslims are bad because of jihad and the terrorists in the world. You're right, there's a misperception here, isn't it?
Yes.
An absolute misperception. They're not all that way. Well, are there anyone else besides Muslims or Islam that has had wars and had their own types of jihads in history?
Yes.
I remember the Crusades.
Husbands and wives.
In history, there were crusades going on, and Christians were out there in the world trying to destroy the Muslims. And they were doing it as their own holy war, weren't they?
Yes. And
So it's not the first time. The Muslims didn't invent this, okay? It's not about religion. It's about pillars and chains. It's not about religion. It's irrelevant. Now that may sound offensive to some people. I'm not trying to be offensive. Religion is not irrelevant. It's attaching the chains only to one religion. That's irrelevant. That's completely false. and it creates strife, and it's intended to do that. Pillars and chains are the dividing point. It isn't about dividing between religion. It's pillars and chains, and that's international. It's universal across the world, no matter what faith, philosophy you belong to. So that's one misperception. Can you think of any others that you've thought of in your minds of these relationships you're dealing with?
I have nothing to do with it.
You have nothing to do with what?
The chains. I have nothing to do with those chains. Those chains are all him,
Okay, the chains are all him, and you've assigned him as who?
my husband.
Oh, okay, so your husband is the chains.
Okay, I don't want my husband. I have a scenario in my head of a husband and wife relationship.
Okay,
And
so you're speaking generally, hypothetically, not specifically of your husband,
Yes.
but of a person, a relationship, and someone accusing the other.
Yes.
It might be a wife being accused.
Correct.
It's all my wife's fault. It's all my husband's fault. They are the chains. No, they're the chains. No, I'm not in the chains. You're in the chains. Oh, when you get into that battle of trying to point the finger back and forth of blame, guess who's in the chains?
You are.
Both.
Both.
Both sides are in the chains. And what's going to happen? Chain reaction. Chain reaction, okay? All right. We identify false perceptions as that step, and you continue doing it. If I were taking one issue, if there were a volunteer that we wanted to talk about one, we could walk through the process. We might not get it all done in the next little while we have.
I'll volunteer.
Okay, let's do it. Because that's the most effective way we can walk through this. Let's volunteer with your example. Go ahead.
My scenario, husband and wife have a relationship. Husband beats the crap out of the wife. Then someday he decides he's not going to beat her anymore. And so he starts having affairs with other women. Then
Okay.
after he decides he's not having the affairs with the other women, and actually during that whole thing, there's verbal abuse. And the verbal abuse continues on for years after with denial that it's a verbal abuse. It's not verbal abuse. And the wife continues acquiescing, and we start calling it what? An abused woman? What are they called? Doormat?
Okay.
And we start calling it that. But there has to be a way for her to be able to handle that without. And the other part of it is this man has absolutely no desire to listen to anything you have to say
Why?
or the book.
Why would that kind of man have no desire to listen to his wife if he's beating the crap out of her, if he is stepping out on her now, if he is abusing her physically, mentally, emotionally, morally, in every sense? Why would that man want to do that? Listen to what a woman has to say who will tolerate that?
He does not.
How long will she tolerate it?
For most women, they don't. They get out of it. I don't know about
A woman who's having the crap beat out of her should have gotten out of it right away. Now, I'm not necessarily saying the decision of divorce, but I'm saying get out of the situation. You don't allow that.
Yeah.
You must find people you can trust, find people who will care for you, find a place to go, but you get out of it. You don't tolerate a spouse who will beat the crap out of you. Okay? If it happens, it's over. You get out of it. And if that doesn't change, you don't get back into it. That's all there is to it. For your sake, for the children's sake, you don't get back into that kind of relationship. Now, whether you divorce or not is your decision still. I'm not necessarily advocating that divorce is the answer for everything. It isn't. It may end up having to take that place in that particular case. But I have seen miracles happen that save relationships. And I am about saving relationships. I'm about saving marriages, saving families. I don't want to see them divorced. And I've seen the worst types of behaviors and activities and addictions that have destroyed and torn families apart, and still seen them come back together. It's all about pillars and chains. The man who's beating the crap out of his wife is so caught in false perceptions and false beliefs and addictions, he doesn't know how to stop himself. He doesn't understand how to resist that temptation and that response when he gets under those circumstances that bring it on in his mind and his heart. He is not in control. They may think he's in control because he's doing the act, he's doing the deed, but he's not in control, he's out of control. The chains are in control, he is not. Remember, he is not the chains. And that's what you've got to keep that in mind. He is not the chains. If it was the woman who is abusing her husband, and it happens today, women in fact take advantage of the law so much today, which is looking out for women, that they use the law to abuse their husbands. False protective orders. is common. They're a dime a dozen, and attorneys use them all the time in divorce cases to teach a spouse how to get a protective order, an ex parte protective order, because then they get control of the kids, the assets. The spouse is thrown out in 20 minutes. He can only take what he or she, most of the time it's a woman getting the protective order, and it gives them immediate temporary custody, which gives them advantage in the mediation process. The attorney's going to probably drop the whole thing before it ever gets to the judge to the hearing. What's that protective order for? Leverage, control, power. Is it righteous?
It's a change.
Sometimes maybe.
It may be necessary on occasion when it's real, when there's really a need for it.
Yes.
But there's a lot of them done today where there's not a need. It's just a strategy,
Yeah.
a legal strategy to get power and control. I know, I've seen it many times. I've got attorneys who will tell me they do them every single divorce case, every time, no matter what.
Okay, this is my dad and my mother, okay?
Okay, fine.
Okay, so I'm going to give that much since they're gone, and they don't need to stand up to this. Okay, so they resolved it. I want to know
Yes.
how they resolved it. They never divorced.
Okay,
They both died very early, and I'm not sure that they didn't die in their chains because I wasn't around them.
they resolved it, you said, however.
Well, I corrected myself.
Well,
They stayed together, I assume.
okay, so they stayed together, they did not part. Now,
Correct.
understand, and I'm going to go to God right now. Okay, let's refer to God and His view of things the best we can for the moment. Does God know we don't understand everything? Mm-hmm. Does He know we don't have answers to everything? Mm-hmm. Does He know when we die, if we didn't understand, but we did the best we could, and we stayed on course, we kept believing in Him, we kept choosing, we kept trying the best we could, we stayed together, we worked it out the best we knew how. Now, is God going to condemn and throw us away?
No.
No. He's not. He'd be unjust. Because God knows better than I do that we are not the chains. We are His children. We're sacred. We're holy to Him. We're everything to Him. He lives and exists for us. That's the loving God that I know.
Well, that's why He provided 3 different kingdoms instead of...
Well, you know what? God is there for all of us, and if we die because we don't, and we're in the chains and we didn't understand it, God has to be just, so He's got a way to work that out. To help us come to an understanding of truth. Yes, He wants us to understand truth, and He's going to do it or He can't be God. I won't believe in Him if He's that kind of a God. He wouldn't be just. The God I believe in is a God who is just and merciful both, and He loves us so much. He will help us. All He wants from us is that we don't give up. Just don't give up. Stay in the fight. You don't want to fight all the time, but stay in it. Don't give up. Learn. Instead of seeing this as a curse to be in a relationship that's having difficulties, look at it as an opportunity. If people would just turn every opposition, every challenge into an opportunity in their minds, it's an opportunity to learn. These chains are there for that reason, to give us an opportunity to learn about them and to feel what they're like so that we will be motivated to then choose a better path, to choose pillars. Pillars are the keys that unlock them. Let's go back to this 7 pillars problem solving process again. Once we identify false perceptions, we want to also identify the truth to replace them. It's actually truth that will help us to see the false perception.
The truth will set you free, is that what you're saying?
The truth will set you free. That's right. Exactly. And the way we identify false perceptions is by their fruits. They have a negative result. So you detect it, and then you trace it down to find it. You examine the whole process by asking questions. Why do I feel this chain? Why do I feel that chain? Where is that coming from? What relationship is it attached to? How long ago did this begin? Did this phobia start when I was 5, 15, 17? Maybe when I got married the first time? Whatever the case is, we ask questions. And as we examine the whole situation, we examine for things that don't make sense, things that don't connect, things that are not consistent. Truth supports truth. Falsehood is not supported by truth. But all truth is supported by other known truth. We want to seek for truth, seek for different perspectives. And one of the most important things we can do in doing that process is begin here in number 6. In finding the root relationship in number 5, we also want to consider number 6, trade places. Trade places with the person or the others in that relationship with whom there is an issue. Trade places to look at it from their point of view. I had a woman one time in a class, very good woman, very sincere, dedicated to wanting to be good all the time, having problems with her husband. She was pointing out faults over and over. She was harping on this one particular thing. She was zeroing in on it all the time. Could not get over it. The man was an absolute slob and irresponsible character because of this problem. We got to point number 6 here. She traded places. I said, how would he look at what you're telling him? If you were him in his shoes, what would he say about what you're accusing him? She said, well, he'd probably say, why don't you look at all the good stuff? Why don't you look about this and this and this and this and this and this? And she kept going on about all the good things about her husband. And in the class where she brought this up, the class thought, wow, your husband does that? Your husband does that for you? Mine doesn't do that. You know, he kept looking at the whole thing, and before she was finished, she realized she had become so fixated on one thing that was she couldn't scratch that itch enough, you know. She was so fixated on it that it was blinding her to everything else that was good. It was making her miserable all the time. But she actually had a husband who was doing an awful lot of good. A whole lot better than so many others that are out there not doing those. He washed the dishes, he helped with the laundry, he helped with the kids, he tucked the kids into bed at night, he got up at night with the babies. He just wasn't putting his clothes away. It was that simple. She was so fixated on him leaving things about and not picking him up. She had blinded herself to everything else. A very good woman. No, a very good woman. And people are. They're honest. They're good-hearted. They want good things, but they get fixated in a chain that blinds them to other things. The problem in their marriage was not as big and as bad as that problem might have suggested at first. And at first she had the entire class going, really feeling sorry for her, you know, until she's traded places with her husband and saw it from his point of view. Once you see it from the other person's point of view, now you have a chance of identifying the true root relationship. I had another student one time who thought the relationship was in herself. She had a phobia. And I'm going into a lot of details, and this is not the time, but the phobia turned out to be not in herself when it started. It didn't start right here. It began when she first got married, when she was 17 years old. We traced that down to a time. It turned out, okay, it was going on something between she and her husband. And then that turned out to not be the root relationship. Turned out it started when it was between her mother and her, and the way her mother raised her, a philosophy to believe in. Her mother raised her, you don't ever say no to a man. You don't ever displease a man. Women are born to serve men. That's what her mother taught her. I said, hello. Is that raising a red flag of misperception right there? Is there something the matter with that belief?
Yeah.
And what did it lead to?
A little bit off.
It was just a whole lot off, okay? But somehow that mother had been raised in a generation, in a faith, in some kind of a belief system that taught her that women existed to serve men. And you can't say no to a man. That's what this 35-year-old woman was believing still. She'd been through a divorce. She had allowed all kinds of things to take place that she would never have done except for that belief. She submit to them. So what did she do? She gave permission to her husband. And because she chose to believe that false belief, now she's got part responsibility in permitting those types of things to happen. You think she'll ever let them happen again? No.
Well, how do you stop them?
Change your belief. Change your belief. You know what she did? She never allowed, her phobia disappeared. She no longer would believe that you had to say yes to everything a man wanted to do. You didn't have to please them all the time, even no matter how badly they treated you, no matter how poorly they were, no matter how twisted their mind might be. You'd have to say no. No. She changed her belief, so now she changes her choice. She changes her desire. She changes her perception. She changes her actions. And so I said, okay, now that you know that that's not true, and that thing is not true, and that thing is not true, are you going to be able to hug your new boyfriend now? Are you going to feel that awful feeling when you get close to somebody that you've been telling me about? She said, no. I said, how come? Because it started in a different place, and now I know it. And I'm going to throw it away. Why? Because I know it's never going to happen again. I don't have to let that happen again. See, it changed the way she thought, the way she believed, changed her choices, because she no longer believes in it. She no longer believes in the false perception, so she changes the way she conducts herself.
Can I take a minute and tell you what my mother did?
Oh, you're welcome.
He beat the crap out of her one night, and she said something to me, and I said, "Why are you letting him do that? Stop him." Well, the next thing I know, my uncle's being called over to the house because my mother has a gun in my father's safe.
Okay.
Okay, she didn't fire the gun, but she stopped him, and he never beat her again.
Now that's interesting. How long was your mother giving him permission to beat her?
5 years at least.
For 5 years she gave him permission to beat her. That's an interesting thing. Did he have self-control?
He
did.
quit. I'm not
He
sure.
did because he quit, right?
Yes, he did because he quit.
What did it take for him to quit?
He had to quit drinking. He
Okay.
also,
So there was drinking and alcohol involved, which it changes the whole scenario as well. But what was, let me get the point here.
it was the no, you cannot do this.
It wasn't just no. She said no or else,
She said
right?
no or else.
No, or you're going to face a consequence.
Yeah.
No, I'm serious. No, I'm standing up for myself. I'm not going to submit anymore. I'm not going to permit this anymore. I'm not going to believe it's okay for you to do that anymore. I'm not going to believe I have to take this anymore. You better change or else. The consequence, right? Now, consequence is important. It's very good that there's consequence. We should be grateful for consequences to bad behavior, bad choices. Because if we didn't have the consequences, what happens? It keeps happening, doesn't it? The consequence, the threat of the consequence woke him up in a hurry, didn't it?
Yeah, he was.
It woke him up.
And it woke him up.
And it never happened again. He never beat her again. Woo! Hallelujah!
No, what else he did?
Marvelous, okay? Now, it doesn't end everything, but here it explains something. He believed he could keep getting away with it, didn't he?
Apparently.
He believed he could keep doing it. There was no consequence. There was nothing to stop him, nothing to change his mind. He had a false belief in his own mind that was generating also his behavior. Whatever those false beliefs were encouraged and given permission to by his own wife. For permitting it, by staying around, by doing it, by allowing it. The day she changed her belief, the day he changed the consequence, and now it changed his belief. It woke him up to the truth of the reality, right? True reality is what we need to solve problems. You see how that solves issues? You see how we compound our own problems sometimes because of our own false beliefs? Your mother compounded her own problem partly because of her own false beliefs that she was following to submit to such things.
Okay, now I'm going to tell you what the chain was that my father put upon himself.
Okay.
He had an affair that produced a child. He did not tell my mother about it. So for those 5 years, he kept beating my mother because it was her fault. He had to show her how she was so worthless that it caused him to do that.
So are we identifying more misperceptions here? There's all kinds of misperceptions, all kinds of false beliefs, false justifications. What are they often doing and serving? What is the purpose we think they're serving? And sometimes automatically.
What's that?
To cover our own sins, to cover our own chains, to pretend that the fault is somewhere else when it's really in us. What is that? Pride? Is that the chain of pride? The chain of dishonesty? Chain of false belief? It's the chain of bitterness, resentment. Keep going on and on and on. And if others believe those things, if you can somehow successfully get someone to believe that, then you've deceived them, and now they're in the chains of deception as well, and they're working at it together. It's just a round-robin, codependent relationship. Very unhealthy. In that case, extremely unhealthy, right? Finally, your mom stood up for herself, told him, here's the consequence if you don't quit. It was serious enough, he quit. Changed his belief, changed his behavior. Now continue doing that in other problems, other issues. Continue working it out, you see? Find the hidden anchor to the chain. At the bottom of every negative belief, every negative emotion and behavior, there are chains and links of misperception all linked together. That master chain, I call it, has an anchor at the bottom. The anchor is the original belief where that particular problem started. Sometimes it's connected to one relationship or more. Sometimes as it goes, it's connected to a whole series of relationships that it affects. But it begins with an idea that you accept, you choose it. Even if you're 3 years old, you can choose to believe something false and not even know you've chosen it. How can a 3-year-old know they're making that choice? They don't. How can a 7-year-old know? We have adults who make choices to believe false things all the time and don't realize they're actually choosing something. But we're choosing it. And we're free to do so. And God will not take that choice away.
Sorry, I'm not trying to be rude.
No, go ahead.
Because you've got great things to say. I find it really interesting because it takes a while for us to even understand that that's the choice that we made. An example is I burnt my foot when I was a little girl, right?
Yes.
And my dad raced around trying to find someone to help. And then I was put on the couch while all the family was in the other room eating dinner and laughing. So I felt alone, like I wasn't part of them. And so that stayed with me for years and years and years and years and years till I could identify that wasn't a truth. The truth was I burnt my foot and Mom was keeping me on the couch because I couldn't get up and go to the table.
Misunderstanding.
Right, but that's all.
Confusion.
It's true that even little 3-year-old minds,
That's right.
5-year-old minds, or 7-year-old minds take a situation and attach a positive or a negative to it, and it affects until they go through a lot of counseling.
Yes, and you're right. And it sometimes takes decades before we even recognize that there was a false perception going on there. And we go through this relationship or that. Sometimes people go through a divorce or two trying to get past false beliefs. Sometimes they divorce people not because the other person was so bad, but because they're so caught up in their own chains, they don't understand how not to do it, how not to wind up there. It's just an unhealthy place to be because they're in the chains. Once we recognize the belief, we can start changing that belief. And the reason it's so important that we chose it at whatever time we chose those beliefs is because that also tells us we can unchoose it. If we didn't have control, if it chooses us and we can't control it, then we couldn't choose to get out of it. We couldn't choose to change it. So thank God in heaven we can choose for ourselves to believe something or not, right? Everything is governed by beliefs. Finding that hidden anchor is so important. We can try to find the links in it. We can do it all day long, find links in that master chain. But if we don't find the anchor, it stays. And it will continue multiplying those links again. Even if we unlock the links. How often do people stop an addiction and it starts again? They stop it and it starts. They stop it and it starts. It hasn't gone away. Only the symptoms have been monitored and controlled and managed for a period of time. But the anchor produces it again. It comes back. Because every addiction of any type, drugs, alcohol, pornography, anger, fear, depression, all kinds of addictions exist in those areas. And I'm not saying that all depression is addiction. It may be that there are some physical conditions which are true out there that can affect people mentally, chemically, emotionally, hormonally. But there are types of despair and depression and hopelessness that are purely related to the wrong course of action, the wrong beliefs. Change them and you come out of it. People think that they can solve a problem by following what depression or hopelessness is telling them to do. No, you can't solve that. In fact, it'll blind you to think that there's no escape, there's no other options, it's totally hopeless, when it's not true. The only thing wrong is that they have believed a course of action which is taken in the wrong direction, and now it leads them into blindness. What they really need to do is go back and find out what different course of action can I take now that will not lead to this place. Go back to find the misperception. Examine the past, the history, the course you were on, and find the course that will not lead to that place. When you find it, it changes everything. Suddenly, oh, so that was it. So that was why I wound up here. Oh, there is hope. There is another option. There's an alternative here. That means I can take a different choice of action. I do have a choice. I do have hope. So now they've got a new course of action to have faith in, that they're willing to do something with. There's pillar number 4, obedience and sacrifice. And okay, I'll forgive my spouse, I'll forgive this other one, because if I don't forgive them, I can't even escape my own trap. Forgive everyone, let it go, get rid of the baggage. And then I have real hope, number 6, pillar number 6. I have hope and confidence again that leads me to be able to love people, love myself, love God, and express those things and feel joy again. See, that's where the pillars come from. That's where the pillars serve us all the time. They unlock the chains and they bring us back to who we really are. They bring us to who we can be as well, how we can develop into the people we want to be. It brings us back to joy, to happiness, to the most marvelous discoveries of who we really are. People don't know who they are. They don't realize it. They associate themselves with the chains too often. We see ourselves as chains. We see ourselves as addictions. We see ourselves as the labels that have been placed on us. We see ourselves as the convict, the ex-convict. We see ourselves as the criminal, even though we've been out of prison for years. Even though we were in prison unjustly many times. There's a lot of people in prison that are unjust because of the abuses of power in the plea bargain system. I see it all the time. We label ourselves because society labels us. I've got about 4 minutes left. So let's make sure that we use that time the wisest we can. We haven't been able to cover a lot of this material. There's no possible way we could have gotten through it all. This is just another type of version of the problem-solving process that's more intuitive rather than just 7 steps. We had addiction recovery. There's a lot of it here. So all I can do is give you the highlights here.
So,
counterfeits. Go ahead.
Maybe with the time we have, you could talk more about how to discover and remove the anchor.
The anchor requires tracing it down to find it. I'll give you this big hint. Anchors are almost always rooted in the need for approval. Okay? They're almost always rooted in an insecure need for approval from people. That's only because I've worked through so many problem-solving processes with people. Almost every one of them ends up there in that type of an anchor. So think about addiction, any type. And there's lots of addictions out there, not just the ones you typically hear about. Addictions to false belief, addictions to fear, addictions to anger, depression, addictions to pride, addictions to all kinds of needs for emotional security, addictions to common things that we all deal with. Do you realize that all 7 of the chains are addictive in their nature? Every one of them. It means everyone in the world deals with it. And every time any person is dealing with addiction, they are also weakening another person who also doesn't understand how to counteract it. So they get into codependent relationships, they weaken each other by their own addictions. Some people have an addiction to being needed. Okay? Some people need to be needed because that's what makes them feel like they're worth something. And so they draw people right into their own addictions so they can serve them and pick them up all the time. Yes?
I guess I just want to be clear. So what you're saying is, we have to go back to where that thought process initially started. The belief started.
Yes.
So I worked my tail off as a young lady, and I remember having $200 and going on a vacation with my family and forgetting my purse at the ferry, right? Get off the ferry, realize I forgot my purse. So now that hard-earned $200 to buy these things I had waited all this time for was not there. So I feel like no matter how hard I work, I'm never going to have enough. I'll always lose it. So how do we release that thought process? So now I've identified it.
You identified back at the ferry, you lost your purse, you lost the $200 in the purse, you worked so hard to get it, now you're never going to be able to get the stuff you were wanting so badly to get with that $200, and somehow you adopted a belief. You just stated it.
Yeah.
You stated a belief, I'm never going to make enough. I'm always going to lose it.
Yeah.
It's hopeless.
It's a fear.
And I've seen it.
Is that a true belief?
Times in our relationship.
Is it a true belief?
Well, it has been. But I might have made it happen.
No,
Okay.
it's not a true belief.
I guess it's not a true belief.
It is not a true belief. You're right. It is not a true belief that just because you lost the purse and the $200 in it back in the day at the ferry, it is not a true belief that from now on you are destined to lose everything and never create any abundance. Do you understand that? Do you recognize that that's not a true belief? You get that?
I do.
Okay. Can you kick it out?
That's the problem.
Okay, see there's a choice. Can you unchoose it now? You chose to believe it at some point when you were very young, okay?
Yeah.
But now can you, as a more mature adult, see that and say, no, that's not true, and it doesn't have to be that way. Of course it's not that way, and I choose no longer to believe that belief.
And it's as simple as that, just saying, I no longer choose to believe
If you
that.
see the truth, what is the truth?
The truth is God has an abundance for each and every one of us. He does. He has more than we can comprehend for each of us.
You're married.
Yeah,
You have children
yeah.
and grandchildren.
18 of them.
18 grandchildren. Oh, has God prospered you?
Yes, He has.
19th is under construction.
Okay, there's a 19th under construction, okay. Has God prospered you?
Yeah.
So losing it, the fact that you lost the $200, you didn't lose all the money you made from then, did you?
Several times we have.
Okay. Okay. Well, you know what? The most richest billionaires in the world, the millionaires and billionaires, they've all lost things all over and over, lots of times.
Yeah.
That's what they learned from. They learned from their mistakes. They learned from things. They turned them into opportunity instead of curses, right? Yeah. They chose to believe that not just because I lost something doesn't mean I can't learn from it and then do better next time, right? See, that's the whole point. You learn to turn loss and failure into opportunity rather than a curse. It's all how you look at it, right? It's how you believe. Seeing it as a curse, it has a negative. Seeing it as a curse creates more chains. But to see it correctly creates peace and opportunity and more abundance. Okay? That's the nature of the pillars. All right. We're going to have to stop. This session is over. Thank you very much. I'm sorry we couldn't get